Now, over halfway into this 20-episode series, the stakes are ramping up and we get not only our first two-parter one-on-one battle, but two of them, across 2 episodes. And yet, for all intents and purposes, this was in fact a slightly low-priority episode before next week's big action blowout. That is insane to think about given just how exceptionally well this episode moved. If last week was the unification of the old and new with Nakatsuru and Shintani teaming up, this week is a meetup at the old people's home with Dragon Ball veteran Yoshitaka Yashima back on storyboard duties, Takeo Ide taking up the chief animation director mantle, Tadayoshi Yamamuro and Hitachi Inaba providing key animation, and of course, Katsuyoshi Nakatsuru once again serving as series chief AD. That's a lot of old Dragon Ball animators. In Ide's case, this is actually the first time he's appeared on the show since episode 1, and really, calling his episode 1 work an appearance is kinda generous, given Chikashi Kubota redrew the entire thing from top to bottom, completely erasing his work there. And well, I can't say things are all that different here. There are absolutely a number of shots where you can see Ide's work, his notched earlobes and kinda boxy eyes are there in places, especially if you pause, but man, it's a real rarity. Katsuyoshi Nakatsuru redraws this entire episode from top to bottom in the best kind of way, which frankly, I think is probably for the best. Ide might have been a legend back in the day, but I can't say I've been hugely fond of his style over the past decade. What's interesting is that the thick lines from episode 7 return, which tells me my guess about them coming from Shintaro Mura was wrong, and actually, these are probably just from Nakatsuru himself. I noticed them popping up in his corrections in previous weeks too, so I guess maybe others just started to follow suit, pretty much in the same way that people have also started to draw ear detailing kinda like him. I remember Hirotaka Nii and Yuichi Karasawa being inspired by Yuya Takahashi back on Super, so it's kinda nice to see people taking cues from other people in this series. On the storyboard front, I've definitely found myself kind of fascinated by Yashima's approach over these past few months. I know I can't shut up about his boards, and I'm going to keep talking about it, because I think what really makes me obsessed is that I just can't nail down what he's all about. Of course, one of the biggest complaints I've had with his boards early on was that they were quite flat and boring, but then that kind of solved itself as we got deeper in, and then in this episode in particular, you almost certainly wouldn't call it flat with a number of dynamic angles and interesting framing found throughout. But at the same time, one issue that's remained fairly consistent is this feeling of claustrophobia in his boards, like he's deathly afraid to pull the camera too far out. The metaphorical lens is glued to people's faces, and when it does cut to wide shots, they're often framed with a very low field of view that still makes things feel closed in. It gives off that feeling of watching Dragon Ball cropped to 16:9, where you're just kind of screaming out for breathing room, where have the top of the head's gone? I adored his board last week and thought this claustrophobic feeling actually worked really well with the sheer scale of the Kraken, but I think in an episode like this that is 90% dialogue, it hurts more than it helps. But one area he's remained remarkably strong with has always been his action boarding, and that not only shines through here, it's aided by the fantastic animation director of this episode, Hiromi Ishigami. I introduced her briefly after her appearance on the opening, but I really need to emphasize what a remarkable career this lady has had. From working with the legendary Mamoru Hosoda on Wolf Children to doing great work on Haikyuu, dropping crazy stuff in Pokemon movies, delivering fantastic action across Procure, dropping in on Naruto now and then, to even sports content like Hajime no Ippo. But it's One Piece where she has shone most over the years, delivering iconic moments throughout the Marineford arc, working closely with Naoki Tate on several episodes. Even in modern content, she's continued to shine time and time again, and that's not even mentioning the insane showings on the various movies. Do I even need to go on? Her talents are crazy, and so to have her doing both key animation and animation direction this week is such a blessing. Her own scene in this episode is the first half of the Vegeta fight, and not only is it my favorite scene of the episode, I think it works as a real masterclass in understanding her style. She is all about arcs of motion, particularly C-curves. I've spoken a lot over the past few weeks about animators and their abilities to draw strong gestural poses, but Ishigami is someone who has that built into her DNA. Going through each cut, you can see all the major poses follow that same curve, over and over again. The poses all flow seamlessly from one another to the next because of it, and it even extends to the actual movement too, whether it be the way Vegeta darts around the Tamagami, or just the way a beam flies off into the distance. It just keeps following that pattern. Alongside that, I think her approach to smears is something that is probably best described as painterly. They're big and bold, but I think one thing that makes her work so iconic are those crazy thick brushstrokes in certain key moments that add so much power to what's on screen. You can find that in so much of her work, and it was that which clued me in with the preview last week that this was even her. She loves to go full charcoal for impact frames especially, and we even got a taste of that in the opening. She really brought Tamagami 2's fluid, bug-like aerial movement to life so well, and I can let you in a little secret that this is not the last time we'll see her helm in episode. The final part of the Vegeta segment here looks to come from the one and only Yohei Sasaki, someone who has just continued to be the most consistent action star across Daima week after week. He kicks off the part where Vegeta bleeds, which finally allows me to talk a little bit about the official rules for blood in Daima. You can bleed as much as you want, but you can't be splashing it around or spitting it up. That's it, and that's the only rule. While Sasaki does animate some combat in the sequence, it's more about powerful effects work and conveying Vegeta's struggle against the Kraken. Now, of course, Ishigami is also the animation director, so you can see her corrections to the posing and expressions and even the effects and spots, which deals really nicely with Sasaki's own great style of hatching and smears. Especially when Vegeta bursts out of the water and the Tamagami swings. The smear here is so good where the eyes straight up smudge over his chest with that awesome thick line work that we've seen from him in the past. To do all this and creature animation at the same time is madness. What a monster of an animator. Of course, intercut between all this is another fight, one between the newly formed Majin Buu and Tamagami 1. Although this has less production emphasis than the main spectacle, it's great to see Tadayoshi Yamamuro seemingly producing key animation here. While it might not be anything special, it's nice and functional stuff that displays the kind of stop-start timing he's been doing since the 90s. It's all very slow and deliberate, and that might not necessarily make for crazy eye candy, but I think it functions fine here for what is a gradual intro to the fight. The back part of this is definitely the strongest, though who actually did it eludes me. I really like the fluidity of it as Buu sticks to the Tamagami and circles around it. That part feels surprisingly modern, and yet the last cut with the key blasts has quite old school effects. Ide? Inaba? Someone else? I don't know, but hopefully we get this confirmed one day, because it's pretty good. Either way, I actually think the best margin segment in this episode isn't action-based at all. It's the two brothers being total dorks over chocolate with some fantastic character acting from what looks like Isamu Takara. The approach reminds me a lot of something I learned watching the making of Kill la Kill, where a younger animator drew a comedy scene, super smooth, loads of frames and refined, and then director Hiroyuki Imaishi stepped in and removed most of the frames because actually comedy is way funnier when you jump between fluidity and choppiness. You have to treat it with the precision of delivering a real joke. That's exactly what's happening here. It starts super fluid with the unraveling of the chocolate, but then Ku's reaction is hilariously chopping, making good use of looping frames. It's a real testament to Takara's versatility that he 100% understood how best to nail this stuff, which when combined with the fun writing and great performances, has resulted in a pair that I've seen people just immediately fall in love with out of the gate. What's funny is that everything I've spoken about across this video has largely been in the second half that Ishigami supervised, and this is what I mean when I say that this was slightly lower priority. It's a gradual build-up to the main event next week, and I think this serves as a better example of how build-up can be done right compared to how episode 7 functioned. Rather than drop the scope of the production across the board, this episode simply starts small and then builds up to the big stuff, and that then makes the cliffhanger feel all the more painful in the best kind of way because you were already up at that high point. I know for a fact that everyone will be talking about next week's episode, and I cannot wait to share my own thoughts for them, knowing what staff are involved, but for now, let me know what you thought of this episode and what your thoughts are for next week, because man, are we in for a good one. Drop me a like if you enjoyed this, subscribe if you're new, please have a great holiday everyone, and I will see you next time.